I never thought death would feel like this. I never thought I would return, but I did. And when I did, everything had changed. My name is Khomeini Farzaneh. I'm 26 years old, born in Iran but raised in California since I was 3. By birth, I was Muslim, but at 18 I encountered Jesus in a way that changed my life forever. I've spent the last few years as a social worker in a nursing home, caring for people in their final days. I've watched life fade from countless eyes. I've heard last words whispered in pain, regret, or sometimes peace. But I never imagined that I would be the one crossing that threshold myself. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story. It isn't just an experience. It is a revelation, a moment in eternity where Jesus himself stood before me and told me something that shattered everything I thought I knew. About history, about faith, about why God allowed Solomon to have 1,000 wives. You see, Solomon was not just a king. He was the wisest man to ever live. A man who spoke with God, who built his temple, who wrote the words that many of us have clung to for wisdom. And yet, he fell. His downfall wasn't sudden, it wasn't loud, it was slow, quiet, like the shifting of sand beneath a great structure. By the time anyone noticed, the foundation had cracked, and the weight of all he had built was collapsing. I always wondered why. Why would God allow it? Why would he permit Solomon, his chosen king, to take 700 wives and 300 concubines? If polygamy was not God's design, why let it happen at all? I had read the scriptures, I had heard the debates. Some said it was cultural, others called it a test of free will. But none of the explanations ever felt complete. And then, I died. In that moment, my body lay still in a hospital room, my heart silent, my breathing gone. But I was no longer there. I was being drawn into something far greater, something beyond anything I had ever imagined. And then, I saw him. Jesus stood before me. And when I looked into his eyes, I understood something I never had before. He wasn't just going to answer my question. He was going to show me the truth. The story of Solomon is one of wisdom, wealth, and ultimately, downfall. But what if I told you that Jesus revealed something deeper? Something history books have overlooked. Something that changes everything we thought we knew. Stay with me. I promise you will never see Solomon the same way again. Before we begin, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Have you ever wondered about Solomon's story? Leave a comment below, and if this message speaks to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because what you're about to hear is only the beginning. They say life changes in a moment, that it takes just a single breath, a single heartbeat, for everything you know to be rewritten. I never understood that until the day my own life unraveled in a way I never saw coming. I work in a senior citizens nursing home. It's not glamorous work. My hands have held trembling fingers in their final moments. My voice has been the last sound many have heard before they crossed into eternity. I have cleaned, comforted, prayed, sometimes silently, sometimes out loud. I have seen the frailty of the human body in its most vulnerable state. And yet, nothing prepared me for the moment when I became the one on the other side of that threshold. It was a normal day, or so I thought. I had been exhausted for weeks, physically, mentally, spiritually. Something felt off, but I ignored it. I had always been the strong one, the one who endured, who pushed through. That's what my job required of me. That's what my faith required of me. That morning, I had been assisting one of my patients, an elderly woman in her 90s. As I bent down to adjust her blanket, a sharp pain ripped through my chest. It wasn't just discomfort. It was a searing, crushing force, like a massive weight pressing down on me. My vision blurred, and in that instant I knew something was very, very wrong. I tried to speak, but my words never made it out. The room around me started spinning. My breath hitched, once, twice, then everything went black. And then I was gone. Before this happened, I had spent years wrestling with questions that no one seemed to have clear answers for. I had left Islam at 18 after encountering Jesus in a way I couldn't deny, but with that faith came questions. Some I was afraid to ask, others I couldn't let go of. One question in particular haunted me. Why did God allow polygamy in the Bible? Why did he allow Solomon, a man he had chosen, to have 700 wives and 300 concubines? How could a man so wise, a king who had spoken with God, fall into something that seemed so contradictory to what God had originally designed? I had searched the scriptures, combed through commentaries, listened to pastors and theologians, but none of the answers ever felt whole. Some said it was cultural, a product of the time. Others said it was about free will, that God permits but doesn't approve. And yet, I couldn't reconcile it with the God I knew, the God who created Adam and Eve, not Adam Eve, and 1,000 others. Deuteronomy 17:17 was clear. The king must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. But Solomon did, and his heart was led astray. So why did God allow it at all? Why not stop him before it destroyed him? I had been asking these questions for months, and then, in the moment my body failed me, in the moment my heart stopped beating, I was about to receive an answer I never could have imagined. I had read about Solomon before, but I never expected that Jesus himself would explain it to me in a way that I had never heard before. I remember the exact moment my body gave out, the moment my heart betrayed me. My lungs forgot how to breathe, and the world I knew slipped away like sand through my fingers. Everything went dark. And then I was floating. I should have been terrified. I should have been screaming, fighting, grasping for life, but I wasn't. I watched as the nurses surrounded me. I saw my own hand limp and lifeless. The face I had seen in the mirror for 26 years was now motionless, expressionless, and yet I felt nothing. No pain, no fear, no desperation, only awareness. I wasn't in my body anymore. I hovered above it, weightless, untethered. It was as though I had been unshackled from something I never realized was holding me down. And then, something else happened. A force, not physical but undeniable, began to pull me upward. It wasn't violent, it wasn't sudden, it was gentle, steady, inevitable. I felt myself rising, as if drawn by something beyond my understanding, higher and higher, past the room, past the ceiling, past the limits of what I once believed was real. I felt a peace beyond anything I had ever known, not just the absence of fear, but the presence of something greater, a love so immense it pressed into me, filled every empty space within me. I should have had questions. I should have been thinking, analyzing, searching for logic, but all I could do was feel, and it felt like home. I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I wasn't in the world I had known. I was somewhere beyond, and I wasn't alone. I found myself in the presence of Jesus. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. Just being in his presence was enough. Every doubt, every fear, every unanswered question that had ever tormented me, it all melted away in an instant. His eyes, they weren't just looking at me, they were seeing me. Every part of me, every thought I had ever had, every sin, every failure, every regret, laid bare before him. And yet there was no condemnation, only love, only understanding. And then he spoke.
You have questions, my child, and I will show you the truth.
I stood there, weightless, breathless, in the presence of the one I had longed for, the one I had prayed to but never imagined I would see so soon, Jesus. Words fail to describe him, not just his appearance, but him. His presence was unlike anything I had ever encountered. It was not just light, it was life itself. It wasn't just love, it was the source of all love.
My child, you have questions, and I will reveal to you the truth.
The moment he spoke, everything inside me unraveled. Every doubt, every lingering question I had carried for years about Solomon, about God's allowance of polygamy, about the contradictions I couldn't reconcile, all of it rose to the surface. I wanted to ask, but before I could even form the words, he spoke again.
God never commanded Solomon to take many wives. It was Solomon's choice, and with that choice came consequences.
In an instant, I was no longer standing in that radiant place. I was seeing history unfold before me, watching, not with my eyes, but with my soul. I saw Solomon, young, strong, wise beyond his years, kneeling in prayer. I saw him as a righteous king, writing proverbs, instructing the people in the ways of wisdom. I saw him constructing the temple, the very house of God, his heart overflowing with devotion. My child, wisdom is a gift, but obedience is a choice. Solomon asked for wisdom, and it was given. But with wisdom comes responsibility. He knew the truth, yet he did not walk in it. I watched as the very wisdom that had made Solomon great became buried beneath his indulgences. He was no longer the man who had humbly asked for discernment. He was a king who had forgotten his own counsel.
The downfall of the wise is not sudden. It is gradual, the result of small compromises, choices made in defiance of truth. In ancient times, the world was broken. War, famine, death. Women left unprotected were often abandoned to slavery or worse. In those days, polygamy was allowed, not as a blessing, but as a provision for the desperate. Yet from the beginning, it was not so.
Own flesh, not many, not divided, not scattered, one.
God did not design the heart to be torn in 1,000 directions. Love divided becomes love diluted, and what is divided is easily swayed.
His wives led him away from God.
What began as wisdom ended in folly. What was given in grace was squandered in compromise. Solomon had everything, yet in the end his heart was divided, and a divided heart cannot remain standing. My child, learn from him. The wisest man in history fell, not because he lacked knowledge, but because he abandoned obedience. A heart that does not stay anchored in truth will drift, and in the drifting, it is lost.
What must I do?
I had seen the rise and fall of Solomon. I had watched the wisest man to ever live crumble under the weight of his own compromises. And then, Jesus did something I never expected. He allowed me to see Solomon's heart.
I saw Solomon's lips part, his voice hoarse, weary, as though 1,000 regrets press upon his chest. Then he muttered the words, I knew, but I did not obey.
Wisdom is a gift, obedience is a choice. Solomon had both, but only one can keep a man from falling.
This was the man God had chosen, a king unlike any other, a ruler whose wisdom came straight from heaven.
God had warned kings not to take many wives, but Solomon ignored this and suffered the consequences.
Deuteronomy 17:17. The king must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He knew, and yet...
Disobedience does not bring destruction overnight. It begins as a whisper, a compromise, a small departure from truth, until the foundation itself begins to crack. He had everything, he lacked nothing, wealth beyond measure, power unmatched. But in the end, it was dust. Solomon thought his kingdom was unshakable, but his choices led to its downfall.
It wasn't just the number of wives, it was their influence that turned Solomon's heart to idolatry.
A divided heart cannot serve two masters. What Solomon allowed into his life shaped his worship, and in the end, he no longer knew the God who had once spoken to him.
What must I do?
Are there things in your life pulling you away from God? Are you compromising your faith for worldly pleasures?
I gasped as the realization hit me deeply. I had spent years questioning Solomon's choices, but then I understood. The same warnings applied to everyone.
True wisdom is not just knowing what is right, but choosing to follow God wholeheartedly.
I choose you, Lord. Suddenly, I was gasping for breath back in my body. The moment I opened my eyes, I knew something was different. Something was wrong. Or rather, something had changed so drastically that nothing would ever feel the same again. The doctor, in disbelief, said, "We lost you. For several minutes, no heartbeat, no brain activity, and yet, here you are." I could still feel it, the other place, clinging to me like an unseen veil. I had been gone. I had stood in the presence of Jesus. I had seen Solomon's rise and fall, had felt the weight of his choices, had heard the warnings echo through eternity, and now I was back. But why? This shouldn't be possible, he muttered to himself. The medical team was baffled. They had no explanation, no reason why my heart had stopped so suddenly, and no reason why it had started again. The doctor went on to ask, Do you remember anything? To which I answered yes, but for some reason he didn't press further. Instead, he nodded slowly and walked away. I can never see life the same way again. I had walked through the veil of death. I had stood before the King of Kings, and he had sent me back for a reason. As I read the book of 1 Kings, chapter 11, verse 11, I couldn't hold back the tears forming in my eyes, not from fear, but from understanding, from responsibility. Jesus gave me a mission to share this message with you, to tell you that wisdom alone is not enough, that knowledge is powerless without obedience, that the same deception that lured Solomon away from God still lingers in the world today. Solomon's story is not just history, it is a warning. A man who had everything, wisdom, power, wealth, yet still fell. And why? Because wisdom alone is not enough. It must be paired with obedience. The Bible says in 1 Kings 11:04, "As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God." He knew the truth, he had the wisdom, but he did not follow it. Are there things in your life pulling you away from God? Are you making small compromises thinking they won't matter? Because they do. Solomon didn't fall in a single day. It happened slowly, choice by choice, moment by moment, until he no longer recognized the voice of the God who had once spoken to him. I was sent back to tell you, do not let that be your story. He is calling you back, right now. The only question is, will you listen? If this testimony has impacted you, if you want to hear more near-death experiences, divine revelations, and biblical truths, make sure you subscribe to this channel. I have so much more to share, and I truly believe God is calling people back to Him through these testimonies. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. And if this message blessed you, consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose life could be changed by what God is revealing. When Jesus showed me Solomon's fall, I realized something terrifying. None of us are exempt from the same deception. The enemy doesn't always attack with force. Sometimes he works in whispers, in small compromises, in things that feel harmless, reasonable even, until we wake up one day and realize we have drifted far from where we began. Maybe you're watching this right now and you feel that drift. Maybe you started strong in your faith, but life happened. Maybe it was distractions, maybe it was relationships, maybe it was success, maybe it was pain. But somehow your heart is not as fully devoted to God as it once was. I need you to hear me. Solomon never thought he would fall either, but he did. So now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about Solomon's story? Have you ever felt pulled away from God? Have you ever struggled with knowing what's right but still choosing the wrong path? Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly believe that testimonies are meant to be shared, not just heard. Your story could encourage someone else who is battling the same struggle. And if this message has spoken to you, if something in your heart is stirring, don't let it pass by. Take a moment to reflect, to pray, to respond. Lord, I come before you with every person who is listening right now. You see their hearts, you know their struggles, you know the places where compromise has crept in, where distractions have pulled them away. Father, just as you warned Solomon, warn us. Open our eyes to see the small choices that are leading us away from you. Give us the strength to turn back, to not just know what is right, but to choose what is right. We don't want to be wise in knowledge but foolish in action. We don't want to be rich in earthly things but poor in spirit. We don't want to be like Solomon in his later years. We want to finish strong. Help us seek your wisdom and follow you wholeheartedly. I pray for anyone watching who feels far from you. Lord, draw them back. Let them know it's not too late, that you are still calling them, that you are still waiting. In Jesus' mighty name,